Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are very excited. We are about to have a very informative presentation on the benefits of plant-based diets. My name is Sara Rief. I am one of the co-chairs of the newly formed Health and Wellness Committee here at the CLA, and I am joined by Gary Laturno, who is a member of that committee. And Gary is very passionate about plant-based diet and eating and nutrition, and he has secured us Dr. Vanita Rahman, who is such a powerful person and doctor in this space. She is from the Barnard Medical Center, where she leads the weight loss research, and her specific area of practice focuses on nutrition and lifestyle. She's also written several books on plant-based nutrition, and we are all going to learn, and Gary's got a copy of that.
There we go.
We're going to learn so much from her today. Welcome, Dr. Rahman. Thank you so much for being with us, and we are very excited to hear all of your information and learn so much today.
Thank you, Sara, and thank you, Lauren and Gary, for organizing all of this, and thank you all for joining us. This is such an important topic, and I really appreciate everyone taking time from their schedule to do this. So I'm really excited to share my presentation with you. Let me get started, and I'm hoping we can have questions and answers at the end. Great. Everyone see that okay? So before we start, I'd like to hear a little bit from you. If you can tell me what your history has been like with nutrition. Have you ever tried to diet before to lose weight? Or if you have, what was your weight loss experience like? And if you did lose weight, were you able to keep it off long term? And did you notice any health improvements? So if you can share that with us in the chat feature or just answer the poll questions, that would be really helpful. Tell us a little bit about you and where you're coming from. I know there's always a little bit of lag from when we launch it to when you're able to vote. So if you can, just take a few seconds to answer if you've ever tried a diet before to lose weight. And if you did, what was your experience like? And also, if there was a diet that could help you lose weight, improve your health, and keep the weight off, would you try it? So let's see what you all think. Let me share the results with you. So, it looks like 96% of you have tried to diet before to lose weight. So this is a common health concern that many of us are working on. And then as far as what your weight loss experience was like, most of you felt that you had short-term success in losing weight. Some of you, about a third of you, felt that you had long-term success. And for others, there was no weight loss or it didn't apply. And then my last question, if there was a diet that could help you lose weight, keep it off, and improve your health, most of you said you would try it. So yeah, of course, that sounds like an easy deal to make, right? So let's learn if such a diet exists today. Great. So let me start first by sharing my own story, because I too have struggled with weight and health issues growing up and through most of my adult life. And it wasn't until I changed my diet that things started to turn around for me. So I was born in New Delhi, India, and I lived in India till I was about 12. And during my time there, I ate a pretty healthy diet. We were a vegetarian family. We ate a lot of fruits, vegetables, legumes. My mom did all the cooking. And at that time in India, things like soda and cookies and ice creams were really cost prohibitive. It wasn't something that we ate commonly. So I was a pretty healthy child without really thinking much about it. And then when I was 12, we moved to the DC area, a huge move for my family. And let me also say, when I was in India, we didn't even have a TV in our home. So exercise came naturally. I would just play outside with my friends. There were no video games, no smartphones, obviously, and not even a television to watch. And after we moved here, everything changed for me, starting with my diet. And this is what my new diet looked like. I was reaching for all these foods that I saw everyone around me eating. And frankly, foods that had been cost prohibitive for me in India were now readily available, like soda and juices and ice cream. And my parents indulged me because they felt privileged that they could offer these to me, and I enjoyed them. And I ate it because I saw everyone else eating it, and I thought it was the right thing to do. And the other thing that changed was my lifestyle. Instead of playing outside with my sister or friends, I was now watching TV every day for a few hours. And as my diet and lifestyle changed, so did my health. So that little black and white picture is me before I moved to the US. And soon after that, within a year, I look remarkably different in that color picture. I had gained weight. I had gone from being a lean child to being a chubby child. And this weight stayed with me throughout my adolescence and most of my adulthood. And as I went to medical school, I learned about exercise, and a good friend of mine used to be an avid runner. I started joining her for her jogs, and I ran every day. And I thought, this is it. If I exercise, I'll be fine. Well, I exercised, but I couldn't lose the weight. No matter what I tried different diets. I would lose the weight, regain it, and so it went. And it wasn't just the weight that was an issue. I was having a slew of health problems. I had allergies all year long. I needed a steroid nose spray. I had asthma. Whenever I would get sick, my asthma would flare up and it would be very difficult to breathe. I was taking an inhaler on a regular basis. And I had prediabetes. My fasting blood sugar was high. I had high cholesterol. And all those jogs, after I would jog, I noticed pain in my knees. I went to see an orthopedic surgeon. He did an MRI, and he informed me that at the age of 27, I had early signs of arthritis in my knee. So the damage was starting very early in my joints. And then things got worse. I was working in an urgent care clinic one night when a patient came to see me. She came because she had a lump in her neck and she was quite concerned. I examined her and the lump was concerning. So I ordered a CAT scan, and the next day I got the results, and she had metastatic cancer. In fact, her disease was so advanced that we couldn't even tell where it had originated. And very sadly, she died a few months later. And I always remember her because one day she was there and very soon she was gone. And soon after that, I was sick with a cold, and I felt a lymph node in my neck, and I was feeling it. And I thought, oh, it's nothing. It's just a reactive lymph node. I'm sick. It'll go away. Well, the cold went away, and a few weeks later, that lymph node was still there. A few months later, it was still there. So I went to have it checked out. And as the radiologist did an ultrasound, he said to me, I have good news and I have bad news. You don't want to hear that from your doctor. And I knew the bad news would be bad. And he told me that I had thyroid cancer. I was shocked, terrified. I had young kids. I was worried I wouldn't live to see them grow up. And even though my doctors told me I had a good prognosis, I was scared. And every time they would do a blood test or a scan, was that fear hanging over me that it's coming back and I'm not going to make it through this. And then one day I was waiting for my test results, and I took my family for a bike ride to relax. And as we were biking, I hit a bump on the path and I fell. And as I fell, it felt like someone had torn my left knee in half. And for some of you who've experienced this, I had torn my left ACL, a very common injury and excruciatingly painful. And I was going to need surgery, and I was going to need rehab, and I was basically going to lose a year of my life where I couldn't do the things I like to do. So I had my surgery, and I went to see my orthopedist in my post-op visit. He looked at me, he looked at my knee, he looked at my x-ray, and he looked concerned. And he said, whoops, I made a mistake. Your graft isn't sitting where it should, so I have to go back and fix it. So he did. This was going to be my third surgery in less than 6 months, and I was just so disheartened with everything going on in my health. So I had my revision, and I was just feeling very down. And one day I was talking to a friend of mine from med school and just, explaining how disheartened I felt. And he said to me, "Oh, Vanita, why don't you look at plant-based diets?" And I thought, what? That's crazy. A, it sounds really extreme. 2, it sounds really tasteless. And 3, if it's really that great, why didn't I learn about this? So I was pretty skeptical, but I was also very desperate at that point. I wanted my health to improve. I felt like I was just spiraling out of control. So I started to do some research. And what I learned was astounding. I learned that plant-based diets can lead to long-term weight loss. They can treat and reverse some of our common conditions like diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol. They can reverse heart disease. They can reduce the risk of many types of cancer like colon, breast, prostate, these cancers that we commonly see in our patients. They can reduce the risk of autoimmune disease like asthma that I had. And they can reduce inflammation in the body, that arthritis that was already set into my joints. I wanted that gone. And they can improve our energy. So why does this work? Let's talk about it. For one thing, you may have heard fiber is good for us. And what you may not know is that plants are naturally high in fiber, whereas animal foods have no fiber at all. So fiber, this key nutrient, we can only get from plants. 2, plants are naturally cholesterol free, whereas animal foods are naturally high in cholesterol. And when we consume cholesterol, our cholesterol levels go up. And another important issue here is fat. Plant-based foods are generally low in fat, but animal-based foods tend to be high in fat. And if you have a food where where it's high in fiber, low in fat, the caloric density is low, which is the case for plants. And we see the opposite for animal foods where the caloric density is high. And lastly, these molecules called antioxidants. Plants are rich in them. They help our body fight inflammation, cancer, infections, whereas animal foods we know contain carcinogens. And in fact, the World Health Organization has said that processed meat is a type 1 carcinogen, similar to asbestos and cigarette smoking. So all these things together impart plants a much healthier profile than animal-based foods. And my family and I started our plant-based journey, and the results were remarkable. I was finally able to shed that weight that I had been carrying since age 12 and keep it off. It's now been 8 years, and I don't count calories, I don't count carbs, I don't think about dieting. For me, it's a lifestyle that's sustainable and enjoyable. And I feel more energetic, more youthful, and stronger than I did before. I can run longer and harder than I ever could in my 20s. But that's my story. Let's review a little bit of the scientific data, because when we're talking about science and medicine, research matters. So what does the research show? If we just look at this obesity graph, we know that we have an obesity epidemic in our country and in much of the world. Before the COVID-19 pandemic, we had another pandemic called obesity. And that has made itself clear now when we see that obesity is a risk factor for more complicated disease with COVID, and obesity-related conditions like diabetes and high blood pressure increase the risk of a complicated COVID-19 infection. So we see that, the majority of in the US, about 40% of the adult population is obese, and nearly 70% are obese or overweight. And we see this among children too, even children as young as 2 to 5. The school-age kids, about 14% are obese. And when we look at older kids, about 1 in 5 are obese. So really disturbing trends that we need to reverse. And obesity has a huge economic toll in our country. In the US, we spend $147 billion every year in obesity-related healthcare. And we also know that the medical cost for obese persons is much higher. We spend on average $1,400 more to care for obese persons than for non-obese persons. And the reason for that is because obesity is associated with all these other comorbidities. I think this statement by the World Health Organization really captures how severe this epidemic is of obesity. The World Health Organization has said that most of the world's population live in countries where overweight and obesity kills more people than underweight. So let's think about that. There was a time we worried about malnutrition or undernutrition, people not having enough to eat. That was the cause of malnutrition. Now we see a different kind of malnutrition where people are eating too much and eating the wrong types of food. This is a really interesting study that was published in the Journal of the American Medical Association a few years back. And what this research team did was they looked at the cardiometabolic deaths in the US in 2012. These are deaths due to diabetes, stroke, or heart disease in adults. And what's really staggering is this top number right here. 45% of these deaths, or over 300,000 of them, were attributed to diet. So just changing our diet could have prevented nearly half of these deaths. And what were the changes that would have helped? Eating more fruits. Not eating enough fruits was attributed to 50,000 deaths. Not eating enough vegetables, not eating enough whole grains, not eating enough nuts or seeds, consuming processed meat, consuming sugar-sweetened beverages, and consuming excessive amounts of sodium. So diet plays such a key role in our health. I just shared with you how important diet is. Well, how are we as a country doing with our diet? This is a report card, if you will, of the American diet, another research study that was published in JAMA. And it shows that the average American doesn't consume a single serving of whole fruit a day, less than one serving a day. Just shy of 2 servings of vegetables a day. 1 serving of whole grains, but 5 servings of refined grains, and we need to reverse those ratios. Just 0.1 servings of legumes, and legumes are this fantastic source of protein and fiber. These are lentils and legumes, like beans, that are just not on the average American plate. And sugar-sweetened beverages, we consume 1.24 of a day. So let's think about it. The average American consumes 1.24 servings of sugar-sweetened beverages, but not even a single serving of fresh fruit. And then 16 teaspoons of added sugar a day, about 15% more sodium than we should, 3,400 as opposed to the 2,300, that's a recommended limit, and some even recommend lower. And we consume 17 grams of fiber a day, which is about 1/3 of what we should be consuming. So clearly we have a long way to go. This is a great research study that was published by Loma Linda University. It's a study of the Seventh-day Adventist group in Loma Linda, California area. And we see that this group is pretty homogeneous in their lifestyle, but their diet varies. Some of them are eating a vegan diet. Some are following lacto-ovo, meaning they add dairy and eggs. Others are adding fish. Some are eating, semi-vegetarians are having meat products maybe once a week, and then non-vegetarians are having it more than once a week. And as their diet changes, we see their BMI goes up. The more animal foods they add, the higher the average BMI. And that correlates also with their risk for diabetes. As their dietary intake of animal food increases, so does the prevalence of diabetes. So this is a huge thing. If we can reduce the prevalence from 7.6 to 2.9 in the US, that would mean a big difference in millions of lives. Now, how many of you have heard of the blue zones? Tell us in the chat box if you have. The blue zones were studied by the National Geographic researchers. This group basically looked at pockets of population in the world where people live long, healthy, productive lives, and they literally just drew blue circles around them. So they were known as the blue zones. One of them we just talked about, Loma Linda in California. Another one is in Nicoya in Costa Rica. Then there's Sardinia in Italy, Ikaria in Greece, and Okinawa in Japan. What all of these have in common is a healthy lifestyle, including a predominantly plant-based diet. For example, the Mediterranean diet that we hear so much about, the traditional Mediterranean diet was 93% plant-based. The traditional Okinawan diet was 99% plant-based. So we see this commonality emerging, which seems to correlate with research studies. This is a really fantastic study that was done by Dr. Neil Barnard at the Physicians Committee. And what his group did was they took people with diabetes in the DC area and they randomized them into two groups. One group got standard care, the other group got a low-fat plant-based diet, and then they followed them and their diabetes. So the way we follow diabetes is we look at a measurement called A1C. And if you're not familiar with that, it's a lab test that tells us what your blood sugars are like for the past 90 days. And in diabetes, we want that number to be as low as possible. And what we see here, a number below 6.5, a number above 6.5 is considered in the diabetic range, and a number below 5.6 is considered normal, and in between it's considered prediabetes. So we see here that the usual care group, their A1C went down just a little bit, not much, 7.8 to 7.5, but let's see what happened to the plant-based group. Their A1C went down drastically. Now these are the kind of changes we don't even get with medications or insulin, because often the medications and insulin lead to a lot of side effects, making it impossible for people to continue them. But here we were seeing them just with dietary changes, without any medication changes. Another really interesting study was done by Dr. Dean Ornish in California at UCSF School of Medicine. And what he did was he took people that had known heart disease and he randomized them into two groups. One group got usual care, the other group got lifestyle changes, including a low-fat vegetarian diet. And then they followed them. And they did an angiogram on everyone before and after to see how they do. And the results are just tremendous. The average cholesterol in the lifestyle group went down 24%. This is comparable to what we get with statins, but without the expense or side effects. The LDL went down 37%, almost comparable to statins, if not greater. The average person lost 22 pounds. And when they repeated that angiogram, in 82% of participants, there was reversal of heart disease. So the blockages that they had seen were actually regressing. Now, just to put this in perspective, in medicine, when we do angioplasty or bypass surgery, we're not reversing the disease. We are simply bypassing the blockage, but the disease continues. And in this case, the disease was actually reversing. So really tremendous results. Another very important study came from New Zealand just recently. This is called the BROAD study. This group also took people and randomized them to a low-fat plant-based diet or typical care, and the results were quite impressive. The average cholesterol levels went down by 19 points. LDL levels went down 23 points. Again, the kind of changes we would expect with statins. The average weight loss was 25 pounds at 1 year. And that hemoglobin A1C we talked about that we use to monitor diabetes decreased by 0.5%. So again, really impressive results just by changing the diet. All right, now I have a question for you all. Has your healthcare provider discussed plant-based diets with you? Tell us about your experience. You all can just take a few seconds to answer that. Let's see what kind of experiences you've had. Let me share the results with you. So this is not surprising. Can you all see the poll results okay? Okay, so 90% of you said that your healthcare provider did not discuss a plant-based diet with you. Only 10% of you did. So why is this happening? Why I just shared with you this amazing research that's coming from very reputable sources. UCSF School of Medicine, New Zealand, the Physicians Committee. Why aren't your healthcare providers talking about it? Well, that made me wonder too. Why didn't my own doctor talk about it when I was struggling? Well, the reason your doctor isn't talking about it is because they simply don't know about it. In medical school, we are taught about nutrition education very briefly, about 19 hours, which at first I thought, wow, that actually seems like a lot. But then when I dug deeper, that's less than 1% of our lecture time, so barely anything. And most of those 19 hours are on complicated nutrition biochemistry, not really in things that are helpful on a day-to-day basis for our patients. So if your doctor hasn't mentioned this to you, you might help them by letting them know what you're learning today. And in fact, I published a commentary in the Permanente Journal about this, that we really need to revamp our medical education. We need to teach our physicians about nutrition because they're at the forefront. And if they can help people change their diet, then they can help so many people along the way. All right, let's switch gears for a minute. I'd like to hear from you again about climate change and what your thoughts are on it. So just how concerned are you about climate change? And if there was a way for you to help with climate change, what would you want to participate in it? And thank you all for answering this. I know with Zoom, it can feel a little bit impersonal, but this helps us connect a little bit with each other. Let me share the results with you. So it looks like 69% of you are very concerned about climate change, 28% somewhat concerned, 3% not concerned at all. And the majority of people feel that if there was a way for them to help with climate change, they would. So what does this have to do with diet and our health? Well, let me close this out. It turns out that's what's good for our health is also good for the health of our planet. So let me share with you why. You may have heard of greenhouse gases. These are gases like carbon dioxide, methane, or nitrous oxide that are produced as a byproduct of human activity. And they help trap the sun's heat and they warm our atmosphere. And what's really interesting is their levels were fairly low until we hit the Industrial Revolution. And then because of human activity, the levels really skyrocketed. And along the way, it's led to a dramatic recent increase in fossil fuels. And as we raise more livestock, we produce more greenhouse gases. So what are some of the consequences of climate change? Well, we've all seen these extreme weather patterns, extreme hurricanes or extreme heat waves or forest fires or extreme winters. They're all intertwined. All of these are impacting your climate. And we're also seeing increased heat-related deaths, food and water shortages, and then migration of populations because of rising sea levels and natural disasters. And then increased damage from flooding and wildfires. We've all seen these headlines in Australia or the Amazon or before that in California or other parts of the West Coast. And then lastly, these also lead to more insect-borne or waterborne diseases as our climate changes. So what does this have to do with our diet? Well, it turns out 30% of those total greenhouse gas emissions globally are due to food production, transportation, and disposal. And 14% of human-related greenhouse gas emissions are related to livestock. So these are animals that are raised for the sole consumption, for sole human consumption. And then, you know, some people say, well, if we could just reduce the transportation, maybe that would reduce the greenhouse gases. But it turns out avoiding air freighted or hothouse grown foods would reduce greenhouse gas emissions by only 5%. So it's really the livestock industry that's contributing significantly. And then eliminating meat could reduce dietary greenhouse gas emissions by 35%. All right, how are we doing as Americans with our meat consumptions? Well, Americans consume 60% more meat than Europeans. And what's really interesting is worldwide, from 1971 to 2010, the population on Earth grew by 81%, but the meat production increased by 300% to around 600 billion pounds. So just imagine that. We didn't change as a species, but the amount of meat we're consuming increased significantly. And by 2050, the projections are that we will consume 1.2 trillion pounds of meat per year as humans. Just a staggering number to think about. It's an interesting chart showing how American meat consumption or production compares to other developed countries. So in the US, we consume 208 pounds per capita per year. So that's 208 pounds per person per year, compared to 134 in Europe and 54 in developing countries. How many of you are familiar with Meatless Monday? They're a really fun nonprofit organization. They also do some good work. And these are some fun slides from them. So they're telling us that global livestock production creates more greenhouse gases than the entire transportation sector. I know many of us are looking at electric cars or other ways to reduce our carbon footprint, but nothing makes a greater impact than what we're putting on our plates. So where do the greenhouse gases come from in our food supply? Well, 30% come from red meat, 10% from chicken, fish, and eggs, and then 18% from dairy. So almost 60% of the greenhouse gases from food are related to animal food, the rest from plant food. So if we could stop animal foods, we could reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 60% when it comes to food. And then where in the supply chain are we seeing this? You know, is it the production of food? Is it transportation? Is it retail? A majority of it is from production. So this is where we need to really make a change. So why are there so many greenhouse gases emitted with livestock industry? Well, it has to do with something called enteric fermentation. These animals that are called ruminant animals, like cows or sheep, the way they digest their food, they have multiple stomachs, and each time food goes through a different stomach lining, they emit greenhouse gases. So they emit a lot of greenhouse gases, and that contributes a significant amount. But then there's also manure, the feed crops that we use, energy use, and pasture. All of these together contribute to a large amount of greenhouse production. I thought this was really interesting that just animal feed itself takes up about 149 million acres of land, uses 167 million pounds of pesticide, 17 billion pounds of fertilizer, and the fertilizers lead to production of nitrous gases that are 300 times more potent than carbon dioxide. And we as taxpayers are paying for this. The federal farm bill, the taxpayers have paid $45 billion over the 10-year period to subsidize this industry. This is really interesting to see how different food groups produce different amounts of greenhouse gases. So here, at the extreme end, we have lamb. So lamb production is associated with 39.2 kilograms of carbon dioxide equivalents of greenhouse gases. Compare that to beef, which is 27, and then you see seafood, dairy, and then pork, seafood a little bit less. But look what happens as you get to animal foods. The numbers really drop. And lentils, one of my favorite foods, it's only 0.9. So it's just a lot more greenhouse gas emissions are involved with animal-based foods than plant-based foods. So it's really important to weigh that in as we make our choices. Okay, another fun factoid by the Meatless Monday group. Producing a quarter-pound burger takes enough water to fill 10 bathtubs. So let's think about that. Tremendous amount of water is used up. And I thought this was really fascinating, this statistic here, that livestock production uses 75% of the Earth's agricultural land. It's just a mind-numbing figure that 75% of our agricultural land is being used just for livestock purposes. All right. Another aspect of animal-based food is antibiotics. Animals that are raised for food purposes are continuously given low doses of antibiotics. This is to prevent infection, but it's also given to promote growth and increase profitability. And antibiotics make their way into animal manure, which makes its way into water and soil, and eventually into us. And this leads to antibiotic resistance in humans. In fact, 80% of the antibiotics sold in the US are sold to the livestock and poultry industry. They're for animal use. Only 20% are for human use. So a really startling statistic. So recently, a report was published by the Eat Lancet Commission. This is a group of experts from different countries, a nonpartisan group that looked at agriculture, human needs, population growth, to make recommendations about food and how to sustain our planet. And that's a picture of Dr. Walter Willett from Harvard's T.H. Chan School of Public Health. And I thought some of these were the highlights from their report. They said that food is currently threatening both the people and the planet. Unhealthy diets now pose a greater risk to morbidity and mortality than unsafe sex, alcohol, drug, and tobacco use combined. So we focus so much on these risk factors, but we're forgetting the single most important risk factor is something we partake in multiple times during the course of the day. And global food production threatens climate stability and ecosystem resilience and constitutes the single largest driver of environmental degradation and transgression of planetary boundaries. And then this is a direct quote from Dr. Willett, who says that transformation to healthy diets by 2050 will require substantial dietary shifts. Global consumption of fruits, vegetables, nuts, and legumes will have to double, and consumption of foods such as red meat and sugar will have to be reduced by more than 50%. A diet rich in plant-based foods and with fewer animal-sourced foods improves health and environmental benefits. So really telling. And the commission goes on to say that a radical transformation of the global food system is needed urgently. And they recommend maybe we eat something like this, where half our plate is full of vegetables and fruits, whole grains, and then other plant-based foods, and just a small percentage has animal-based foods, which they say is optional in the text. So really recognizing that plant-based foods will not only improve human health, but improve the health of the planet. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't tie all this into this raging pandemic right now that we're going through. So let me include that in here. So you may be wondering, how is this all related? Well, you may have heard of something called the Air Quality Index. It tells us about the healthfulness of the air that we breathe. It's set by the EPA, and it goes anywhere from 0 to 500. 0 to 50 is good. That's what most of the US is like, but when we've had raging forest fires, we're above hazardous. So you can easily find the AQI in your neighborhood by just going to airnow.gov and typing in your zip code, and it will show you. So I typed in Washington, D.C., and our air quality is healthy, towards the higher end of healthy range, but healthy. So what does that have to do with COVID-19? Well, it turns out that poor air quality and impact of climate change impacts our health. It damages our lungs, it damages our respiratory tract, and makes us more susceptible to injury, whether it's an infection or inflammation. And a study out of Harvard's T.H. School of Public Health was released earlier this year. And what they found is a 4-point increase in the air quality index. Remember I said it goes from 0 to 500, just increasing it by 4 points and being exposed to it long-term increases COVID-19 mortality rates by 15%. So this is huge. If we can clean up our environment, we could prevent many deaths. And the group went on to adjust this for other comorbidities, and the correlation still stood. And what they concluded was that as of April 6, 2020, 248 out of the nearly 2,000 deaths in New York County could have been prevented by decreasing the air quality index by just 4 points. So really staggering. It's really important for us to protect our environment so that we can not only improve the health of the animals, but also our health and deal better with these pandemics. All right. So, you know, people come to plant-based diets for many reasons. They come to it for health reasons, like I did. Some people approach it because of ethical concerns. Others are concerned about the environment. And lately, there's a last group that try plant-based diets to improve their athletic performance because plant-based diets reduce inflammation in the body. So whatever your reason is for looking into plant-based diets, I would urge you to go to our website at pcrm.org where you can learn a lot more about plant-based diets. We have tons of recipes, information on just about every topic you could think of for nutrient, and it can be a great source of help. Well, let me conclude with that, and thank you all so much for joining us today and listening to this. And I'm happy to answer your questions, either written or if we want to take live questions. Thank you. I will stop sharing my screen with you now.
Okay, so we have received quite a few questions through our Q&A, so thank you everyone for submitting those. Are you able to see the questions?
Yeah, let me.
Wonderful. So go for it. If there's one that you want to address verbally, please do so. We can click that answer live button and get it off of our queue.
Yeah. So let me answer. I'll just go in order. Sorry. Okay. So the first question is, can we get a copy of the slides? Yes, we can do that. I can send them to Sara or Lauren, and I'm happy to share them with everyone. And then Robert asked, if we can recommend diet regimens, are there websites with these diets that we can easily access? Yes, Robert, there are so many. There's pcrm.org. There's also nutritionfacts.org, forksoverknives.org, .com. And in California, actually, UC Davis has an integrative medicine program that is plant-based. So if you just do a search for UC Davis integrative medicine, you can find that. And for those of you who may be members of California's Kaiser Permanente network, they have a whole plant-based sections. If you just do a search on Permanente plant-based, you'll find a lot of information about plant-based diets.
Hey, could I just comment? Can you hear me? Am I on?
Yes.
Dr. Rahman is currently teaching a class every Saturday morning from DC, Saturday morning for us. And I found out about it because my two daughters told me they had signed up for it. And that, so I registered also. So every Saturday morning, and they absolutely love the class. They're very motivated. And they find that they actually listen to her much more than they listen to me. I'm not sure why that is, but at any rate, and they found it very, very, very helpful. So there are many, many opportunities to learn how to do this. And my personal experience in terms of talking about this, the biggest single challenge that we all have is, after been eating a standard American diet all our lives, is what do I do? How do I change? And another issue you might comment on, if you would, please, Dr. Rahman, is many people have said to me, they've had open heart surgery or whatever, and they say, I would never give up eating meat or, cheese. And, any thoughts about that challenge or issue?
Yeah,
if you could.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. What we also know is there tends to be an addictive property to food too. So certain foods tend to be more addictive, especially high-fat foods. And meats and cheeses, by their very nature, are high in fat. And fat is one of those very addictive substances that when we consume it, we keep wanting that. So there's that. There's also the issue of not knowing. Sometimes people just don't know because there's so much misinformation out there that maybe seafood is healthy because it was part of the Mediterranean diet. The message may be getting lost that it was the fact that the Mediterranean diet was 93% plant-based. That's what made it healthy. Or that seafood was part of the Okinawan diet, so it must be healthy. Well, no, the Okinawan diet was 99% plant-based. That's what made it healthy. So I think there's a lot of miscommunication, misinformation. And especially now with the internet, there's so much out there conflicting information that it can be hard for people to know. And that's why it's really important to go to reputable sources. And if someone is making a claim, ask them, what is the basis for that claim? Why do you think this is healthy? And whether that's your healthcare provider or your friend or your well-meaning relative, it's really important to just think a little bit more about what's behind that recommendation. But I can tell you, having worked with people, recently I started working with a gentleman who was diagnosed with diabetes. His blood sugar was over 480. His doctor put him on very low doses of medication. He came to see me. He changed his diet. Within 2 weeks, we were able to stop one of his medications and his blood sugar was below 100. And we are working towards stopping altogether, because this is really about the diet. It's not medication. You know, medication is sort of a Band-Aid. The diet addresses the underlying cause. Let me pick up some other questions here. There's a question from Karen. How many people have had friends or family discuss a plant-based diet with them? For example, my brother is a long-term vegetarian, now vegan. My godson is a vegan. Friends from Yale, high school work boyfriend are also vegetarian and vegans. Well, thank you for sharing that, Karen. I think we're seeing that more and more. There's more awareness about vegetarian or vegan diets. More people are exploring them. And in fact, the food industry is capitalizing on it. We see these Beyond Meats or Impossible Meats. Kentucky Fried Chicken just said they would be serving vegan chicken wings or vegan fried chicken, because retailers are recognizing that people want plant-based foods for health reasons or ethical reasons or the environment, and they're trying to keep up with that.
I have a, if I could just interject, in your book, Stronger with Plants, if you want to get started, I'd recommend this is a great place to start. In your introduction, you commented that a nagging question, you went through medical school and didn't get any of this. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts, because it seems to me this is an absolute tragedy. I'm not sure if things have really changed in medical education. And my personal experience is that a typical physician who is a critical person in the process of trying to be helpful, that doesn't know any more about this than the guy next door. So, you know, I guess who is controlling, why is this? And I've gotten some answers to this question, you know, from people who are involved. And, you know, the answer really is the drug companies have a very subtle influence on what's taught in medical schools. The deans know that if they teach plant-based eating, I mean, they may not get the funds to put the new laboratory in. I mean, you know, do you have any thoughts about that? I mean, you know, please comment if you could, please.
Well, you know, you're absolutely right. This is what really held me back from just jumping on the plant-based wagon was, why didn't I learn about this? I went to a good medical school. I trained at one of the top cardiology hospitals in the country, and I didn't learn any of this. And there are many reasons, Gary. It's such a complicated issue. Yes, special interest groups are playing a huge role in our public health policy, in our food policy. We often know there's conflicts of research in the way that policy is set, but it's also playing a role in our education. And then it sort of becomes this cycle where people don't know, so they can't teach others, who will then not know, and then who will not be able to teach others. So that's actually something we're working on at the Physicians Committee. We provide education to physicians for free. We offer other opportunities where they can attend conferences and learn. We mentor medical students. They rotate through our clinic. And we travel abroad to educate physicians abroad. So there's a huge education gap, and it's very complex. And, you know, sometimes it really feels like a grassroots effort, but it's taking hold slowly.
Yeah. Hey, and let me also say the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, the president of which is Dr. Neil Barnard. These are, unlike drug companies, they don't get money from, I mean, it depends upon us. And I've made a point of donating, you know, a modest amounts in the scheme of things. But, you know, everybody I know who's a lawyer seems to run for office and they're always calling for donations. But this is something that really I think is critical. And I just highly recommend that you go to the PRC.com website, Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, and look at it and make a donation. Please. It's really, really important. I think we all agree with that.
Yeah. Thank you, Gary. And actually, I think an apt analogy here is with tobacco use. Getting back to your question, Gary, there was a time we knew we had evidence about tobacco and how dangerous it was. But due to all sorts of special interest groups, our policy didn't change. I remember when I came to the US in 1983, people smoked on airplanes. When I got a job as a 16-year-old, my boss used to sit across from me in her office and smoke, and that was normal. You know, things didn't change for a long time. Doctors used to smoke in hospitals, even though they knew. So change is sometimes slow, but it does happen, and we're helping make that happen. Let me also get to some of these questions. David just asked, where can we get information about the Saturday classes? David, you can go to pcrm.org and look at our events page, and you can find information there. And then Olivia asked, do you recommend processed vegan products like Beyond, etc., and do you eat them yourself? So really important question. We're hearing a lot about Beyond Meat and Impossible Meat, and there are others. I don't mean to single them out, or the vegan cheeses. So these products are healthier than their meat or animal-based counterparts because they're better for the environment, they're better for the animals, they're more humane, they're naturally cholesterol-free. So all those things are good, but they're also high in fat, and they can be high in sodium, and they're low in fiber. So if you're trying to lose weight or lower your blood sugar levels or lower your cholesterol, they may not be the best choice. There are other options out there, like instead of vegan cheeses using hummus or eggplant spreads, and instead of some of these very processed burgers, using black bean burgers or veggie-based burgers, or making your own. I know we have tons of recipes that you can use from our website. Something my kids love are carrot dogs, which sounds crazy, but they taste really great. And then
Dr. Rahman, on that note, Dr. Rahman, can I just ask, I think it's always helpful, what's sort of a typical eating day? What does it look like for you?
Yeah, thank you for asking. So so my morning will either be like a bowl of oatmeal with fruits, or sometimes if I'm in a rush, I can't even do that. I'll just have a slice of toast with a little bit of jam, or a whole grain waffle. I make the mix ahead of time. I just pop it in the waffle iron, and I have it with a bunch of fruits. And then lunch is usually, you know, I'll have rice and beans, like rice with black beans and maybe some salsa on top, maybe some grilled vegetables, or just a plate of spaghetti with marinara sauce and steamed broccoli on it. And then something similar for dinner. It could be veggie tacos. It could be a Mexican casserole or a veggie lasagna. But let me say, I know Adhana wrote here that if I eat a plant-based diet, I don't feel satisfied. Sometimes that happens to people because they think plant-based diet means eating like a boring salad and just leafy greens. And I can tell you, while salads are great, I rarely just eat a salad by itself. I usually have lots of whole grains, lots of legumes and lentils, like chickpea falafels or hummus or eggplant dip sandwiches. So many options, sushi. It's rarely something that doesn't leave me feeling satisfied. And if you're feeling that way, I recommend really trying out the recipes and experimenting with them.
Comment, I hear that a lot, and people, you're absolutely right, think of eating plant-based by eating just salads and things. And that's a good thing to start, but it's, I think, you can't just have that alone. Right. And I've emphasized starches, you know, like whole grains, potatoes, sweet potatoes, corn on the cob, things like that. that just fill you up. And I can eat as much as I want. I'm never hungry. I've lost weight, kept it off, and had phenomenal results in terms of my, the numbers.
Yeah.
I also eat a lot of greens, but I would not exist on greens alone. That just wouldn't work.
Yeah, I think it's often people just don't know how many options there are and how flavorful and rich plant-based cuisine can be. And it's just a matter, whatever you like, you can convert it into a healthy plant-based version. Even pizza, you can get the pizza with marinara sauce, tons of veggies, just skip the cheese, and you'd be surprised how great it tastes.
Yeah.
And I see Moses here wrote, are there any foods you would recommend that are good for your kidneys? Great question, Moses, because we know so many people do struggle with chronic kidney disease, but there are the same diet that helps you with your diabetes or blood pressure or heart disease, which is a low-fat plant-based diet, is increasingly showing efficacy for kidney disease as well.
Yeah, let me, I see Cheryl's comment about, she's not able to lose weight because of the starch in a lot of plant-based foods. And I would also, I think that's a really good comment, that I think it's important to recognize that I eat a very low-fat diet. I mean, the only fat I get is probably about 2 tablespoons of ground flaxseed every day. A lot, if you eat a diet that has, like, for example, high fat foods, that is also going to be a problem. I think it's much more difficult. Would you talk about that, Dr. Rahman?
Yeah, I see there's Valentina brought up something similar, went vegan, wasn't able to lose weight. So, and Gary, you just brought up a really good point. We really want to keep this low fat if we're trying to lose weight or improve our blood sugar. So what does that mean? So let me define this for you. It means eating 3 to 5 fresh fruits a day, eating 3 to 5 vegetables a day. They don't have to be raw. They can be cooked, steamed, baked, however you like them. Eating 3 to 5 whole grains a day, like quinoa, brown rice, oats, whole wheat pasta, but avoiding refined grains like white rice, white pasta. And it means eating legumes. These are lentils, beans, 1 to 3 servings. But it also means keeping the high-fat foods to a minimum. So what does that mean? That means avoiding oil, avoiding fried food, avoiding coconut, which is plant-based, but it's really high in saturated fat, avoiding chocolate, which tends to have a lot of added sugar and added fat. But then there are other plant-based foods that are that have some fats that we need, but we need just a little bit, like nuts, peanut butter, almond butter, like seeds, like tahini, flax seeds, chia seeds, pumpkin seeds, avocados, olives. But here's the key: we need very little. So if you're trying to lose weight, I recommend you limit those to 1 to 2 tablespoons a day altogether. I don't mean 1 to 2 tablespoons of each one, but all together. Because that's often what it is. It's those nuts and seeds and avocados, they sneak in and they do lead to weight gain because their caloric density is quite high.
Right. Oh, hey, I see Bob Plotkin has asked, have you worked with doctors of osteopathy? Would you comment on that, please?
Yeah, actually, one of my colleagues, Dr. Dasmal Sardana at the Barnard Medical Center, she's a doctor of osteopathy. So, she's a plant-based physician. She's a lifestyle medicine physician. So many osteopaths are just as interested in helping patients with chronic disease. So the approach isn't that different. Our care is very similar. We focus on managing chronic conditions with a particular emphasis on nutrition and lifestyle.
Yeah. Hey, let me also comment, though. I actually had an osteopathic doctor assigned to me at Kaiser for a little while. Mm-hmm. He didn't know anything about plant-based eating. All he knew about is how to give prescription for drugs, period. That was it.
Yeah. Well, and so there are 2 types of doctors for those, for listeners who may not know, osteopathy and allopathic medicine. Allopathic is the usual MD that you see. And in both groups, nutrition education is fairly limited. So many people don't, many of them don't know much about it. But, you know, it's hit or miss whether your physician or healthcare provider will know or not. But again, that's why it's so important to do some of this research on your own and reach out to credible sources so you can learn.
Oh, hey, Ed Colker has a great question. Pasta is high in carbs, which I understand turns into fat. Should pasta be limited? Please comment. I'd like to, if you're finished, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So great question, Ed. This comes up all the time. You know, in our culture, we have vilified carbs as the reason why people are gaining weight or losing control of their health, and that's simply not the case. It's not the pasta, Ed. It's the type of pasta. So get whole wheat pasta if you can, or spaghetti. That's whole grain, avoid white pasta. But here's what's even more important. What's going on the pasta? Is it meatballs? Is it sausage? Is it a lot of cheese, Parmesan, melted mozzarella? Those are high fat foods that lead to weight gain. Is it the amount of olive oil that's being put on it? So really, you know, having a whole grain pasta with marinara sauce and steamed vegetables, maybe sprinkle in some lentils on there, that's unlikely to lead to weight gain, unlike some of the other things I just mentioned. So pasta is fine.
Yeah, let me also add, the body's preferred source of energy really are complex carbohydrates. Mm-hmm. That burns beautifully. What doesn't burn well, what sits in your body, is fat, whether it's animal or vegetable. That's the problem, Ed.
Yeah, absolutely.
Would you agree with that, doctor?
Yeah, absolutely. You're right, Gary. The preferred source of fuel for our brain is glucose, and for most of our cells, and glucose is a type of carbohydrate. So we need about 70 to 80% of our calories should be coming from carbohydrates, not
yeah, there's a huge misperception in the public it's horrible. Yeah, and thanks for clearing that up.
Sure, and let me just add here, Margarita wrote, there are so many fruits and vegetables that we're not aware of. How would you recommend getting introduced to these? I'm specifically worried about eating a new veg and being allergic. Not sure if it makes sense. You know, good question, Margarita. People are often concerned that they don't know where to begin. It feels overwhelming. Start with what feels familiar and comfortable. Gary mentioned corn on the cob. It's in season. Throw it on your grill. Put it in your microwave. It's great. Doesn't require any preparation. Similarly, sweet potatoes. Roast them in the oven or throw them on the grill. They're great. So just look at recipes. Think of what's calling your name and start with that. Start slow. Introduce things gradually. And just enjoy the food. And before you know it, all these things that you weren't thinking of, maybe your new favorite, like cauliflower or Brussels sprouts. Same with fruit. Go with what's seasonal, what's fresh, what's sweet, and that's where you're going to enjoy it the most.
We have, 2 questions left? Dr. Rahman or any of the presenters have specific weekly, monthly diets that they can recommend to us? Dr. Rahman?
So this might be helpful for people if you're looking for some kind of a monthly plan or weekly plan. At the Physicians Committee, we have a 21-day vegan Kickstart. It's a free online program. You self-enroll, and then we send you daily email reminders with some recipes. So that could be a good way to start. There's some books out there too. The easiest thing is to just look at some of the recipes, think what appeals to you, and just write down, these are some go-to breakfast options. These are some go-to lunch options. These are some snacks and some dinners, and then just build from there as you go through your food planning.
Your book also, Stronger with Plants, has a lot of recommendations and in fact, Dr. Rahman is a phenomenal cook. She's got demonstrations in our class every week, and my kids love it. You know, and I'm not a cook. I just eat whole plant foods. But as I said, Sarah's asked me that question, and I said, well, I think a whole plant food diet certainly will make you healthier, but it doesn't change your personality. And some people are chefs and others aren't. I'm not a chef, but I like to eat. I like to eat a lot. I love to eat whole plant foods. I would never go back to like refined. It's just like it's interesting. One woman who's struggling with this said, well, I'm trying to do this, but my hubby brings home all kinds of junk food. What am I going to do? My wife loves to eat stuff like that, but she can eat really small quantities, maybe one, and I can't. I just don't avoid it. My biggest challenge is when I go on cruise ships. In the middle of the day, they open and they've got all these chocolate chip cookies. I just can't resist one or two, and maybe I have 3 or 4. That's who I am, so I stay away from that stuff. And I love, eat a starch, and I feel satisfied, and I don't have these problems. So everybody's got a different personality, and there's a way to do it. I've done it.
Yes, Gary, I don't know if you've checked out Dr. Rahman's Facebook page, but she has beautiful pictures of what she's eating with their children. And I was cruising through it a couple of days ago, and there's nachos and pizza, and you need some ideas. Everything looked fantastic. So I can second that looks to be an amazing chef as well.
Yeah, my daughters want to adopt her and bring her. One lives in Fort Lauderdale, one lives in San Francisco, but I don't think we'll do that. But she's available online, and we love her. So thanks very, very much.
This was very informative, as I knew it would be, Dr. Rahman. I thank you so much. I learned so much from Gary and now from you, and excited to keep introducing plant-based food to my children and my husband and get us all on board.
Oh, thank you, Sarah. And they're lucky to have you doing that for them. So, for you. Yeah.
By the way, we probably have not a chance to ask or answer all these questions. So, if you want to, you guys know how to contact me or Sara or Lauren, just send them our way and we will get them answered somehow, okay?
We do have a discussion board on the CLA website for CLA members as well, so you can post your questions there, and we're happy to answer them or get in contact with Dr. Rahman and get some answers for you that way too.